Good morning. Welcome to the Kingsport News Hour for the 13th day. Yes, now the 13th day of the 7th month. We're in the 16th year of Cheonggye. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Cheonggye, Young Jin-moon. And let's go now to see what's going on around the kingdom. And right now in Chungcheong, Tennessee, it is 62 degrees this morning with rain, it looks like. They're having some rain. And then today it's going to get up to 76 and periods of clouds and sun with a couple of showers and a thunderstorm. And then tonight getting down to 61, a thunderstorm this evening, otherwise mainly clear. And in Father's hometown of Cheongju in North Pyongan province in what is today North Korea, 74 degrees right now, mostly clear. Clear and humid tonight, low of 66, and tomorrow humid sun in areas of high clouds in the morning, followed by plenty of clouds, 86 for a high. And at the Cheonggye Palace in northeast Pennsylvania, currently 50 degrees and mostly cloudy, 81 for a high today, sunshine mixing with clouds, breezy this afternoon. When it gets breezy in Pennsylvania, you got to watch out for those falling trees, especially after a rain. Tonight, periods of rain, low of 61. Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas. Right now it is 64 and clear. Whoa, getting up to 98 today. Very warm with plenty of sunshine. And some rain this weekend. Tonight, partly cloudy, 73 for a low. And then at the Palace in Suncheon, Korea, it is currently 82 and mostly clear, 73 for a low tonight, brief shower or two this evening. Otherwise clear to partly cloudy and very humid. Tomorrow, high of 92, partial sunshine, hot and very humid with a couple of showers in the afternoon. And then at the Gunma Palaces in Japan, also rain going on there as well. And it's going to last for at least 60 minutes. 78 degrees current temperature, getting down to 74 tonight. Brief evening showers, otherwise cloudy and very humid. Tomorrow, heavy showers in the morning, considerable clouds and very humid. At the property in Ilan, Taiwan, in the Republic of China, currently 84 degrees and overcast. And now it is, what's this going on here? You're not able to see this. Okay. Strange ad going on the side there. Let's see here. 84 degrees and overcast. Clear tonight, 75 degrees for a low. Tomorrow, high of 94, mostly cloudy and hot. Caution advised if outside for extended periods of time. Okay. Sometimes in Korea, I get these really terrible ads on the side of my content there. I guess I was not sharing my screen, so it's fortunate that they did not see that. All right, let's see here. It is. Let me see. Turn on some light here. What book am I in? I'm in the book on the Pan-Pacific Providence. Yeah, let's get some light on this here. Okay, here we go. So, it says in the future, and when Father says in the future, God plays the long game. So I think we need to remember that. Yeah. It's going to be 1,000 years in the future. I don't know. But Father says in the future, or it could be 10 years. Well, it's already been, let's see, he said this in 1991, so it's already been 34 years. So I guess let's go. In the future, for the purpose of farming, fish farming, fish farming. And Father talked a lot about fish farming, but anyway, here he's talking about it again. We will be able to, there's no subject, right? So I don't know if it's we, but people, let's say people will be able to move the waters of the Pacific, or water from the Pacific, even as far as several hundred miles. That actually, now he says, now he's speaking to the present, that time has come. And that's how we will move live fish. We won't need many people. In other words, we'll not require much labor. Okay. We'll make a fish building. Yes, he talked about the fish building quite a lot. Okay. We'll make a fish building, and it will be completely automatic. All right. And then you just push a button, and it will give the fish, it will feed the fish. And then when they are a certain size, they'll be selected out and placed on a truck. And then you'll be able to eat the fish as you're driving along. Won't have to stop for anything at the 7-Eleven. Just eat the fish that's in the back of your truck. Okay, I think that's what. I'm pretty sure that's what it says. In fact, I'm absolutely sure. Okay. All right. All right. So, Father talking about the fish building, and I think I saw somewhere where they're actually doing that in China or someplace like that, or something similar anyway. Fish farming, inland fish farming. Kupjinim visited a fishing village somewhere in Korea, and I can't remember exactly where it was. But anyway, they were engaged in fish farming, and they were talking about how, the further out there, and this was fish farming in the ocean. So they had, sort of areas there, and they had fish inside there, and the fish were growing up inside their little uh, defined area. But they were complaining that the local authorities, the bureaucrats, decided exactly where those sort of areas could be. Anyway, so there's a lot of regulation going on in fish farming right now. Okay. All right, let's go to what's going on. And of course, Xi Jinping had his big day. It's interesting. Of course, these military marches by communist countries, they do them very well. I mean, when when Trump tried to do a military march, didn't go so well, did it? One thing that communists do very well, and the French too, by the way, is these sort of forced military marches, right? Because, and Fowler referred to this, remember, in a quote that we had a few days ago, I think it was, wasn't it? That saying that, hey, America needs to watch out because the Chinese are accustomed to following orders, right? And so, and Americans are not. So you guys better watch out. And that was certainly demonstrated by the marches that they did yesterday in Beijing. Very impressive. But what does it mean? What does it mean? So I want to do two stories today that sort of talk about that. And one is, let's see here. Let's do this one first. In the Washington Examiner. Okay, and then we'll do one from the Independent in UK. And here, this author, Tom Rogan, is saying that China, Russia, North Korea axis isn't a military alliance. So he's sort of saying, well, yeah, okay, it's impressive, but let's not get too worked up about it. And here, Wednesday's military parade in China garnered international media attention. And it does, because it makes for good television and so forth. Held in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the scene of a Chinese Communist Party massacre of up to 1,000. No. No, not up to 1,000 political protesters in 1989, a very minimum of 1,000 and probably several thousand more. The parade celebrated the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. This was the day that Japan actually signed the official surrender on the USS Missouri that was anchored in Tokyo Bay at the time. Of course, it was on August 15th that the emperor announced his surrender, but it took time for the Missouri to get there and so forth. So the actual signing didn't happen until September 3rd. Chinese President Xi Jinping's honored guests included Russian President Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Indian Prime Minister Modi. Okay. But talk of a budding China, Russia, North Korea, NATO-type military alliance is exaggerated. Yes, it is. Rather, it reflected four compelling but more limited concerns. Okay, let's see what those are. First, China's growing economic and military dominance over Russia and North Korea. Yes, it is, because this event was not held in Moscow. Putin, I'm sure, would have liked to have had his own celebration on September 3rd, but no, because, Russia was a part of the defeat of the Japanese, the military in eastern Siberia and in what is today northeastern China. But no, he had to go to Beijing to celebrate rather than celebrate in his own town, on his home turf. So yes, it showed China's growing economic and military dominance over Russia and North Korea. That is true. Second, the shared antipathy of all three nations toward the United States. And especially one particular United States citizen whose name happens to be Donald J. Trump. Yes, shared antipathy of all three nations. But if you judge a man by his enemies, I think the fact that Russia, China, and North Korea don't like Trump should say something about President Trump. Yay, Trump, and his post-1945 Democratic Alliance structure. Right. Third, the hope of all three nations that, through careful but closer cooperation, they can boost their own individual interests, yes, alongside their shared interests. Their own individual interests are going to take precedence, right? Fourth, India's desire to broadcast dissatisfaction over the tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump in response to India's importation of Russian energy supplies and associated funding of Russia's war effort against Ukraine. Careful is the key word here. Where does it say careful? I don't see careful. It says careful is the key word, but where's careful? Anyway, I see. Careful. All right, there's careful. Okay. The hope of all three nations through careful but closer cooperation. All right. The striking Chinese military equipment and troops displayed on Wednesday included advanced weapon systems such as hypersonic vehicles and ballistic missiles designed to smash into U.S. territory of Guam and sink American armored aircraft carriers. These weapons afford China credible means to defeat the U.S. military in a conflict over Taiwan. But just as Russia would have little interest in defending North Korea from U.S. military action, China would have little interest in supporting a Russian conflict with NATO. Similarly, neither North Korea nor Russia would want to directly involve itself in a Chinese attack on Taiwan. Directly, I guess, right? I mean, Similarly, while making a big show of his talks with Xi and Putin, Modi would have watched the procession of weapons on Wednesday, fully aware that some of them were built with his country in not so pleasant mind. This is no small issue for Modi, as there have been repeated military clashes in recent years in the highly contested line of actual control areas along the Chinese-India border. Dozens of soldiers were killed in these confrontations. India will not join a Sino-Russian partnership because over the long term, that partnership would cost New Delhi far more lost market access to the West, for example, than it would gain. But it's not just India. Russia also is always sort of aware of the fact that Eastern Siberia is sparsely populated, but has a huge amount of resources that China would like to have. And not that China is going to attack Russia over the border, but it could use these weapons as kind of as part of the leverage that it would exercise against Russia in some sort of a negotiation where China would gain access to those resources, right? Oil, gas, lumber, coal, Eastern Siberia, that's all, gold actually, gold as well. There's a lot of gold there, especially up near the Bering Strait. So Putin also, I'm sure, had various things going through his mind when he saw all these fancy weapons. From a U.S. standpoint, then, the cooperating China, Russia, and North Korea axis poses specific, but not unified, strategic challenges. The first challenge of strengthening Sino-Russian military cooperation is the anti-submarine warfare expertise that Putin is affording the Chinese military. In contrast to Russian land forces, Russian submarine forces remain generally excellent and know how to detect, track, evade, and defeat U.S. submarine forces. While U.S. submarine forces are inferior to their while Russian submarine forces are inferior to their U.S. counterparts, their experience against the U.S. Navy remains invaluable to the Chinese military. That is because submarine warfare remains the defining area in which the U.S. has a clear advantage over China. In the event of its invasion of Taiwan, the Chinese military fears that U.S. submarines would wreak havoc on its forces. When it comes to Kim Jong-un, the key U.S. concern is Russia's provision of technical expertise to advance North Korea's nuclear ballistic missile program. In return for the deployment of thousands of North Korean soldiers to bolster its Ukraine war effort, Moscow is helping Pyongyang improve the rocket systems that power its ballistic missiles and the targeting and maneuver proficiency of the warhead reentry vehicles that would carry nuclear weapons onto their targets. Yes, Kim Jong-un was referred to as a rocket man by President Trump during his first term, and that's no accident. He is a rocket man. To be clear, this Russian enabling of a direct threat to the lives of millions of American citizens reflects Putin's enduring ideological hatred for the U.S. This action and innumerable other activities prove the delusion of those who believe the U.S. can draw Russia out of China's orbit. Putin wants to weaken the U.S. because a world in which the U.S. is strong is a world in which Russia cannot easily blackmail or conquer its democratic neighbors into submission. Still, Xi, Putin, and Kim lack the unifying alliance purpose that sustains diplomatic military relationships such as that of NATO. In contrast to NATO allies, the Chinese and Russian intelligence services spy against each other rapaciously, limiting their most valuable intelligence sharing to only those areas their senior leadership allows. Beijing also holds a dominant balance of power in its relationship with Moscow. At present, Putin must tolerate this uncomfortable dynamic due to the war in Ukraine. That war makes Russia heavily reliant on its energy exports to China and the reciprocal imports of goods from China that would otherwise be unavailable due to Western sanctions. Nevertheless, long-running tensions over Sino-Russian borders, each country's ambitions for regional influence, and divided agendas in Europe limit the prospect of direct military alliance. The Russian political and military elite remain deeply fearful that Xi intends to turn their country into a de facto Chinese colony. Yes, I would say that that's a very, very justified fear. Deeply fearful that Xi intends to turn their country, Russia, into a de facto Chinese colony. All right, and I think actually this is not far from reality already. This leads both countries to important policy restrictions. Just as China limits its support for Russia's war in Ukraine to the provision of equipment, including, though denied by Beijing, some military equipment, Russia will be highly reluctant to join a Chinese attack on Taiwan. China wants an end to the Ukraine war on terms favorable to Moscow, but Beijing also wants it ended sooner rather than later. It fears the increasing damage that its support for Russia is doing to its European relationships. The relative absence of top European officials at Wednesday's parade in protest of Putin's attendance reflects Europe's frustration over China's policy in Ukraine. She knows that were the European Union to ever impose coordinated sanctions over China's support for the Russian war, it would pummel the already struggling, wholly export-dependent Chinese economy. China values its key economic interests far more than it does Russia's control over Ukraine. Russia would be similarly reluctant to directly participate in a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Putin knows that even in the event of a Chinese victory, the benefits would accrue massively to Beijing. Regardless, assuming U.S. intervention in Taiwan's defense, Russia would lose vast amounts of air and naval forces it could not easily replace. This would fundamentally weaken Putin's military power potential in Europe in his long-term project to restore Russian political dominance over Eastern and Central Europe. Indeed, while China's regional supremacy would be assured by its conquest of Taiwan, so also would Moscow's vassal status under Beijing. And were a Taiwan-U.S. victory to occur, Russia would suffer grave military losses without receiving any possible Chinese rewards. Then there's a North Korea war scenario. Beijing and Moscow know that the only credible scenario for a new Korean war would be if North Korea launched an invasion of South Korea or a ballistic missile attack on South Korea, Japan, or the U.S. And they know that in any of those scenarios, the U.S. and South Korea would have to fight to remove Kim Jong-un from power to prevent a recurrent threat. That would force them into one of two choices. One option would be to stay out of the war and instead use political leverage to ensure that Chinese interests along its North Korean border were protected post-war. The second option would be to fight the U.S. military against a backdrop in which the international community near universally supported South Korea and the U.S. Some close South Korean partners might even deploy forces. Beijing and Moscow also know that the second option would mean a credible risk of direct nuclear confrontation with the U.S. They know that they would almost certainly lose that nuclear war. Beijing and Moscow also know that the second option would mean a credible risk of direct nuclear confrontation with the U.S. They know they would almost certainly lose that nuclear war. This is not to say that China, Russia, and North Korea axis is something to put out of mind. On the contrary, reflecting this parade's intended challenge to the West, attending European and U.S. delegations were limited to low-level officials. In an attempt to substitute for those notable absences, Beijing included CCP bought and paid for Western politicians, such as Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Zizarto and former Australian Foreign Minister Bob Carr. Ultimately, the West recognizes that this parade is not about celebrating a historical victory over an evil imperium, but rather about intimidating the free world. Yes, 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 yes. That's it. That's it. It was about intimidating the free world. Modi also knows this, but is playing for U.S. attention. Yeah, I think so. That unity provides the cause for proportionate concern here. This alignment poses some direct and significant threats to the U.S. and its allies, but it does not represent a unified military alliance. These countries might have varied mutual interests, but they also have abundant mutually exclusive agendas. Yes. All right, I think that was very well written. Tom Rogan, who is this guy? They don't tell us, do they? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. The second story I want to do on this parade is this one, which is in the Independent, I think, right? Yeah, the Independent in Britain. And this author says, Michael Sheridan, it would now be wise to assume China she is going to move against Taiwan. This is how it will happen. All right, let's see what he has to say. Make no mistake, today's victory parade in Beijing was the most significant event since Xi Jinping came to power in China in 2012. All right, could be possible. It was both triumphant and prelude. The triumph of military might and a prelude to using it. The Chinese leader did not don a uniform. Instead, he favored a plain Mao-style outfit, plain outfit of distinctive material cut. Boy, he repeated himself there. In contrast to most of his suited guests overlooking Tiananmen Square. This was the new China at its most militant. Nuclear missiles, drones, advanced weapons of all kinds, thousands of regimented troops, marching in tight precision. Much has been written about it as a display of pride. It is now time to consider intention. The honored guests were the Russian, Putin, and okay, we know that. With Xi, they made a trio of autocrats unmistakably identified as the key players of the day by the Chinese media. All three are hardened survivors. Two of them, Putin and Kim, are steeped in blood. In the Chinese system, there is no longer any need to eliminate opponents physically, but Xi did not hesitate to decimate the military, purging defense ministers, generals, and staff officers. The dismissal of his foreign minister in a spy scandal seemed a mere afterthought by contrast. One wonders whether over their cups of tea, the Chinese and Russian leaders exchanged ideas about the necessity of purges. For Putin, the specter of Yevgeny Prigozhin, rebel leader of the Wagner Group, who died in a mid-air explosion, has vanished from his calculations. As for the ever-smiling Kim Jong-un, he lives with the knowledge that he executed his own uncle, Chiang Song-tek, after a reported tip-off from China that Chiang was plotting against him. Kim's unfortunate relative was tied to a scaffold in front of an audience of cadres and shredded by an anti-aircraft gun. Well, that's one of the stories that we have about how he died. Anyway, it was very gruesome. There are a number of ways in which he's supposed to have died, or maybe what was done with his body later on. But anyway, it's very gruesome. Nothing in Xi's biography suggests that he enjoys cruelty or is personally ruthless. But he does wield power in a way that rivals Stalin in purpose. It would now be wise to assume that he is, in fact, going to move against Taiwan. U.S. intelligence and military officials have testified that Xi has instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to invade or coerce Taiwan by 2027, a date marking the century of the PLA's founding. The date is not very far away. It must be taken seriously because the autocrats may think there may never be a better time in world politics to strike. Xi and his comrades have watched as Putin's war in Ukraine turned from blitzkrieg to stalemate, but there is no higher consideration in the Chinese system than survival. China considers that Putin has won the war merely by avoiding defeat. Really? Somehow, I think there's a shadow of doubt over that sentence. I mean, a big country like Russia going against a small country like Ukraine in the beginning, many people, in fact, the vast majority of people thought that Russia was just going to walk all over Ukraine in just a few weeks, right? You remember that? That was that was 3.5 years ago. So one could actually say, if you talk about survival, one could actually say that Ukraine has won the war already by surviving. So I think this may be a little bit wrong on that particular point. But anyway, okay. The third of the trio, Kim, is a veteran of 2 summits with U.S. President Donald Trump, from which he emerged with both his nuclear arsenal and his power intact. If ever a group of leaders radiated confidence, it is these 3. For all their belligerence, Putin and Kim do not have military credentials. Kim was a Nepo baby and Putin a civilian KGB operative. She does. His father was a commander under Chairman Mao who fought campaigns across North China in the country's civil war. Well, that doesn't mean that Xi Jinping, because by the time Xi Jinping was born, the civil war was over. So he himself, just because his father was a military man, doesn't mean that he is military. Xi's first job was in uniform as one of 3 private secretaries to the Defense Supremo of China. At a young age, he was privy to military secrets. This was a staff post, of course, where no Chinese general has fought a land campaign since 1979 against Vietnam, which they lost, which I always feel like I have to remind people. They lost the war against Vietnam, right? Anyway, but throughout his rise up the civilian ranks of the party, Xi took care of the soldiers while governing on the East Coast facing Taiwan. The record shows that he spent time visiting garrisons, improving conditions for the men, making sure families had good accommodation, and boosting morale. Now he reaps the rewards. Insecure emperors do not parade themselves in front of thousands of armed troops. I doubt he has ever looked so solid in office. So where does it go from here? China has absorbed multiple lessons from Russia. It has learned, for one thing, that it does not have to storm the beaches of Taiwan. A combined operation involving an opposed landing is one of the most difficult and hazardous operations of war, as Winston Churchill wrote. She knows the quote, his father had read Churchill's memoir. Putin has shown that he does not have to do it that way. Chinese tactics against Taiwan could be a hybrid of the Crimea and the dash to Kiev. Perhaps Trump has studied the German strategist Karl von Clausewitz and his theory of the concentration of maximum force at a decisive point. Xi and his generals know it by heart. In this scenario, China, well, I don't know, let's not give too much credit to these people. China, and that's a habit I think that we have. We always assume that the enemy is a genius, and often they're not. In this scenario, China could command the seas by defeating an American force with one kinetic shock, securing control of the strait between Taiwan and the mainland. It could proclaim blockades, maritime quarantines, compulsory shipping lanes, and aviation exclusion zones. Its new weapons could shatter American and Allied air and naval supremacy. They could try, yes, but defeating the American force with one kinetic shock, I guess he's referring to maybe sinking an aircraft carrier or something like that. Maybe a nuclear submarine. Maybe that's what he's referring to here. Okay, but Americans are ready for him, though. Then there is what Chairman Mao called the magic weapon of propaganda and appeals to the greater Chinese nation. There is a ceaseless campaign of infiltration and cyber war to persuade the Taiwanese that resistance is futile and destiny beckons and unity is inevitable. And we covered this, right, several years ago about how China is infiltrating every aspect of a Taiwanese society. Chinese state outlets push narratives that the U.S. cannot be trusted to defend Taiwan, emphasizing economic benefits of closer ties with Beijing. As Xi said at the parade, China is unstoppable. Okay, the trio of autocrats see this as part of a new world order to replace the old world made after 1945. They explicitly used the victory parade to state an authentic history of the time and to promote, of all things, the United Nations as their instrument of change. The Chinese Foreign Ministry unveiled three faults in the UN. First, serious underrepresentation of the global South. Second, erosion of authoritativeness. And third, an urgent need for greater effectiveness. All bland. Who could possibly object? Well, serious underrepresentation of the global South. This, for example, refers to the lack of global South countries on the Security Council. In other words, right now, this is a veiled sort of protest against the fact that there are 5 countries on the UN Security Council that have a veto power, and there are other countries too. There are about 20 or so countries in all, but 5 of them have veto power: U.S., UK, France. What are the other 2? Russia and China. Those are the 5 countries. And basically, nothing happens in the United Nations without the unanimous approval of these 5 countries. And so China would like to change that by maybe getting rid of the absolute veto power of the 5 countries, or by putting some, for example, India has always wanted to be on the security, or be among the permanent members of the Security Council. India, and maybe, Saudi Arabia or somebody like that. So China is trying to champion their cause there. An erosion of authoritativeness also, I think, stems from that. An urgent need for greater effectiveness. All right, so they want greater. So China wants greater control of the United Nations, and they can't have that as long as U.S., UK, and France, these 3 countries, have absolute veto power within the Security Council. Then it added, governance gaps exist in new frontiers such as artificial intelligence, cyberspace, and outer space. The solution: China proposes the Global Governance Initiative to promote the building of a more just and equitable global governance system, and work together for a community with a shared future for humanity. George Soros, are you going to sue them for plagiarism? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. China wants us to have a shared future. Work together for a community with a shared future for humanity. Under, of course, the CCP, right? Under the CCP. Equitable global governance system under the CCP. Naturally, it promised extensive consultation and joint contribution suitable for China's role as a staunch builder of world peace, contributed to global development, and defender of the international order. Is that what they're doing in the South China Sea? Defending the international order, right? Building world peace. Is that what they're doing there in the South China Sea? I don't think so. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un may not seem the likeliest people to run a consultation exercise to make the world a kinder place through artificial intelligence and space travel. Global governments on their terms is an offer that nobody is meant to refuse. The gauntlet has been thrown down. Yes. All right, this is Michael. Okay. And Michael Sheridan, he's the author of The Red Emperor, Xi Jinping and His New China, out now in paperback from Headline Press at £12.99. Oh boy. So, I chuckle and so forth, but this is basically, the satanic sides, like the author said at the end there, the gauntlet. The gauntlet has been thrown, and the West needs to respond. The gauntlet has been thrown down, he says at the end there. Yes. So I guess the first thought I have is that, wow, we sure are glad that there is a God. If there weren't, we'd really be in trouble. But there is. And true parents have gained victory at the cosmic perfection level. And we're working against right now the curse that was laid upon the world by Hakchahan 13 years ago. But now we're about to exit that. So we'll see what happens right now. We'll see what happens with these three leaders, these three tyrants. We'll see what happens to them. Okay. Right now, yes, they're presenting a pretty strong front, and but we need to. The West needs to do its portion of responsibility. President Trump certainly, I'm sure, is taking notice of this, and I hope he does something quickly. I think he will have to do something to bring India back into the fold. And he'll probably work on that. China and Russia, especially China, he really needs to come down. He's been dealing with China with kid gloves, and he really needs to take the gloves off and start and dealing with China in a very strong way. Okay. All right, let's see now what else is going on. Okay. And let's go to Newsmax here, and they're just sort of piddling around with the domestic stuff. Okay. All right. The National Guard in Chicago. Somehow after reading those two stories, all this other stuff seems, not nearly as important. Okay. Whitaker, Trump's representative there for Ukraine and Russia, said Trump knows how to negotiate Ukraine peace. I certainly hope so. Right. All right. And Haggerty says China has forgotten U.S. aid in World War II. Yes. Okay. And then Giuliani says he has a broken back. Ouch. And here there's a hope for a U.S. trade deal by November. In Florida, ending all vaccine mandates. And here, U.S.-Mexico pledge to fight cartels and respect borders. You saw that video, I'm sure, of Trump going after that boat that, dare I say, allegedly was carrying cocaine to the United States. And I say allegedly because they showed us that video, and they told us that, okay, there were 11 terrorists, all right? But, the poor guys who were on that boat, I mean, they probably, I don't know if they were even getting paid very much. I kind of feel sorry for them. But anyway, they were obviously foot soldiers, and the real guys who were directing them were back in Venezuela. Apparently, okay, we're told that the boat took off from Venezuela, that it was headed for the United States, that it was carrying a large cache of cocaine, or a large amount of cocaine. And so President Trump sent a missile and blew the thing out of the water and killed the 11 people who were on board. And we're asked to believe everything that the government tells us on that. And it's Trump, and so we want to believe it. 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 I just sure hope it doesn't turn out to be some tourists. But even the Democrats are not challenging the fact. They're not even challenging the fact that this took place. And they put out a video and say, this is what we did. But the Democrats are not challenging, oh, really? Did you really do it? Or is this some sort of a video that was produced 5 years ago? They're not saying that. Instead, what they're saying is, oh, we think you broke international law. To me, that seems like a poor choice of strategies there, because the Democrats, we know, are always on the side of, they've shown themselves always on the side of people who are undermining the interests of the United States and the interests of the American people, right? So they're on the side of migrants, illegal migrants, not legal, but illegal migrants, who rape and pillage them once they come to the United States. And now they're on the side of, and they're not questioning that this is the fact. They're on the side of drug smugglers. Come on, you expect to win your election next year by siding with drug smugglers, all right? Anyway, some people are saying that, oh, Trump may have broken international law, but I think the vast majority of American people are not really going to care too much about that. And instead, they see him doing something about drugs being smuggled into the United States. Something that hey, blasting a boat out of the water, that makes for good television. Now, still, he's not talking about working on the demand side, is he? He's still not talking about working on the demand side, about strengthening American families so that families can educate their children and sort of lower the demand for these kinds of drugs in the United States. Yeah, that's really where it has to go. All right. And here, oh my goodness, there they come with the terrible, terrible ads again. Okay, hold on a second. Did I get rid of it? Yes, I did. Right. All right. Oh, I wasn't sharing again. Ah, good. Very fortuitous. Okay. Anyway, they come with these. Anyway, that's all right. Okay. All right, let's see here. Okay, Massey to Newsmax, Epstein bill forces DOJ transparency. But, we need to remember that the Democrats had this material for 4 years. And surely if there were anything in there that was in the least negative about President Trump, they would have released the material during their time. Okay, and here's someone else says public owed Epstein transparency. And DHS ends temporary protected status for Venezuelan migrants. They have to go back to their country or someplace else, but they cannot stay in the United States. So basically, you don't have to go home, but you cannot stay here type of situation. Okay. Media pop culture put inaccurate and negative spin on marriage. Let's look at it this one. Yeah. Let's look at this one. Okay. In 1928, sociologist W.I. Thomas maintained that if men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. It is true that perceptions, no matter how false, have real life consequences. This is certainly true in the way the public perceives the marital status of women. For the most part, the media and the pop culture put a negative spin on how marriage impacts on the life of women. This perception, however, is not based on reality. 4 astute researchers have released an impressive study that contradicts the conventional wisdom. The pursuit of marriage, motherhood, and women's well-being is the work of Janet Erickson, Jean Twenge, Brad Wilcox, and Wendy Wang. Erickson is a fellow at the, the study published by the Institute for Family Studies and is based on a survey of 3,000 women. They explored 4 important factors affecting women's well-being: happiness, loneliness, physical affection, and meaning and purpose. The study was occasioned by a concern over declining fertility rates for women. In the late 2000s, 85% of 18-year-old women said they were likely to have children. In 2023, the figure dropped to 72%. This has serious ramifications for women in society. The report, however, brings good news to women who get married and start a family. Married mothers are nearly twice as likely to report being very happy compared to single childless women. Nearly half, 47% of married mothers, 43% of married childless women say they are enjoying life compared to 40% of unmarried mothers and 34% of unmarried childless women. Okay. Married women are about half as likely as unmarried women to experience frequent loneliness. All these numbers. Only 11% of married mothers and 9% of married women report being lonely most or all the time, compared to 23% of unmarried mothers and 20% of unmarried childless women. Moreover, unmarried women without children are the most likely to have difficulty making new friends. Okay, well, let's go to the conclusion. The authors of the study conclude that marriage appears to offer a stabilizing and supportive context that lifts the burdens of motherhood while strengthening happiness, connection, and meaning. It is for this reason that those who hold a traditional moral values need to trumpet this report. There are many reasons why a declining fertility rate is an ominous sign. It is imperative that we get the word out that the conventional wisdom of women and well-being is based on a distorted view of reality. For more on this subject, see the work of Don Fader at stopdemographicwinter.com. Those educators, members of the clergy, political leaders, and community activists who are pro-natalists and are supportive of marriage and the family properly understood are able to set these records straight. When young women learn that marriage is in their best interest, they will be more inclined to take a fresh look at this subject and hopefully go on to experience the joys of motherhood. It's a win for them and a win for society. Yeah. Right now, of course, the birth rates in most sort of, well, wealthy countries, or OECD, let's say OECD countries. The OECD is sort of the country, club of rich countries. It's declining quite quickly. Let's see here. What am I going to do here? I want to look for something. Birth rate by country, 2025. Okay. All righty, let's see here. Countries with the most births per 1,000 women. Okay. So this is in any given year, right? So out of 1,000 women, how many kids were born? And Niger has the highest in Central African Republic, Chad, Somalia. And this may be the reason that Africa receives a blessing, material blessing later on, because they're going to have the population, advantage of population. Here, right? You can see all these countries have a very low birth rate, right? The ones in light, what is it called? Light green, I guess. Whereas these countries here, sub-Saharan Africa especially, have high populations. And I remember a father saying in a speech where I was listening to him in Belvedere, where he said that, yeah, the people who have the most babies win, right? Of course, father was hoping that Blessed Center families would do this, and have a lot of babies. But definitely, you know, these countries here, like for example, South Korea, out of 1,000 women, okay, 5.62 births in 2025. Okay. So out of 1,000 women, just 5.6 babies. US 11, Canada 9.8, Brazil 12. And look at Europe here: Spain 7.3, France 10.3, UK, what's UK? 10. Okay, Russia 9.3, China 7.4. China, of course, has a little bit of a unique situation. This is partly because of the one-child policy. Um, uh, it's also because women over 25 can't get married. They cannot find spouses. New Zealand 11.5, 11.4, and so forth. So this is a little bit different from what we often hear about how uh, a country has to have a birth rate of something like, what is it, 2.1 per woman. In other words, that's the number of women, that's the number of babies that a woman, if any particular woman, will have over her life during her lifetime. Okay, but this woman numbers that we just saw now a little bit different. How many babies were born in a particular year out of 1,000 women? And so South Korea, five. No, 1,000, 100, even 200 years from now, the people living on the Korean Peninsula will not be descended from the people who are living here now, for the most part. Just like, the people who are living on the Italian peninsula today are not all that, don't have all that much in common with the genes of the Romans 2,000 years ago. These places are the demographics are, and demographics are absolute, and you cannot turn things around in 1 or 2 years, or even 10 or 20 years. It takes generations. And I think earlier today I was reading of something where it said that there is no country, no civilization in history where the number of babies that a woman has during her lifetime falls below 1.9, right? No civilization in history has ever been able to recover from that. So, yeah. So Europe is a toast, basically, and America, Korea, Japan are all toast in that sense. But so who's going to fill the vacuum then? Well, like I said, these countries in Africa also, um, uh, which also happen to be Islamic countries, and Islam as a whole is having more babies than non-Islamic countries, but also blessed central families. Blessed central families. Okay. Boy. And aside from communism and socialism and all the things that represents, the demographic threat to God's providence may be the biggest of all, I think. And so I hope that blessed central families will get married young, have lots of babies, and make sure that we populate the world with our children. All right, let's see here. It looks like I clicked myself out of this. All right. All right. So, Harry. All right. Let's take a look at Breitbart. Breaking down the deep state, former DHS spokesperson reveals how former Secretary Nielsen and anonymous Miles Taylor worked against Trump from within. Okay. Yeah. Blah. But even here, Breitbart's focus is so much on the domestic situation. And that's also important. But how could they completely ignore what's going on in China? You know, this kind of thing. I mean, all right, well, I mean, okay. All right, let's see here. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, well, finally here, all the way down here. China flexes military muscle at WW2 Victory Parade. Okay, missiles, drones, robot wolves. Yeah. Okay. Oh, here we go. Venezuelan minister claims video of U.S. strike on drug boat is AI fake. I was waiting for someone to say that. Yes, of course. What took them so long? What took them so long? Okay, debunk the video as fake. But anyway, they got the message. They know if it's fake or not, and they certainly got the message, regardless of what they say. Okay. Health officials urge masks as coronavirus wave hits Newsom's California. All right. Pro-science Newsom launches own CDC with Oregon and Washington. My goodness. 78% of Americans don't care about Taylor Swift. and, and the guy that she's getting married to. How is that even news? All right. Okay. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. So anyway, yes. So Xi Jinping had his fun, but now, how is he going to follow up with that? And so perhaps he will intensify his infiltration of Taiwan in terms of society, you know, and the propaganda that they are directing at Taiwan. And so I think it's very important right now that the second king is there and is basically countering that right now more spiritually than anything else. But he's also sort of rallying the troops there, right? There were blessed central families there who were kind of, well, like the disciples after Jesus' crucifixion. They were doing their own thing, you know, and doing their own, pursuing their own careers. But now he has gathered them back together, and they are forming a strong core of people who will help to move the providence forward there in Taiwan and then eventually in China. So let's pray for him and also support him financially in any way that we can. And you can go to you know, well, I think Greg has advertised pretty well how we can support that effort financially. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your presence today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is what, Friday? Yes, I'll see you tomorrow. God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.